On June 10, 1942, a combat engagement took place in the Libyan Desert in the Knightsbridge area. Italian positions came under attack by an armored group consisting of 30 American M3 Grant medium tanks and 10 light M3 Stuarts, serving in 2 British regiments. As the Allied forces advanced, Italian units, using camouflage positions in the folds of the terrain, opened artillery fire. The shelling caused critical damage to the armor of a significant number of Grants, causing them to burst into flames. In a short span of time, about 20 of the attackers' vehicles were left destroyed on the battlefield. Allied forces retreated, having lost a large portion of their committed hardware, while the Italian side lost 2 medium M1340 tanks. The decisive role in the defense was played by the Semovente Da 75-18 self-propelled guns. Over several months of the North African campaign, these machines shifted their function from means of artillery support to battling enemy armor. The prerequisites for creating this weapon had emerged earlier, when the Italian army assessed the challenges of modern warfare. At the start of World War II, the state of Italy's armored forces proved inadequate. The M1340 series medium tanks showed limited effectiveness. Their armor was vulnerable to British anti-tank weapons, and their 47mm gun had low armor-piercing capability at range. The Reggio Esercito Command realized the need to strengthen their armored fleet to counter British tanks like the Matilda and Crusader, as the development of the Carro Pesante heavy tank was facing delays. In search of a technical solution, the military turned to Germany's experience. Artillery Colonel Sergio Berlese visited German factories to get acquainted with current military developments. His attention was drawn to the Sturmgeschütz 3 assault guns, vehicles based on medium tanks with a gun mounted in a fixed casemate. They demonstrated effectiveness in infantry support and attacking fortifications thanks to their low silhouette and powerful armament. It was concluded that creating a similar machine for the Italian army was necessary to even out the tactical balance. Upon his return, the development of an Italian equivalent to the assault gun was initiated, utilizing existing M1340 tank chassis. The concept involved removing the turret to install an armored casemate, which allowed for the creation of an economically viable means of fire support. For weaponry, the 75mm field howitzer, the Obiseda 7518, Model 1934, was chosen, a weapon Berlese himself had helped design. The 18 caliber barrel allowed the artillery system to fit within the limited space of the self-propelled unit. Initially, the plan was to use this new equipment as mobile artillery for indirect fire, similar to the American M7 Priest, but combat conditions adjusted the tactics for using the Semovente. In January 1941, the Ansaldo Company received its first order to manufacture 30 vehicles, after which engineers began creating wooden mock-ups for military approval of the design. By February, the first prototype had been produced. During proving ground tests, it demonstrated compliance with technical requirements, confirming the viability of the chosen concept. By May, the order volume was increased to 60 units, but a significant problem emerged. The self-propelled gun's armor was insufficient to protect against British 2-pounder anti-tank shells, which punched through the front of the casemate, injuring the crew. Designers had to strengthen the protection by adding extra 25mm armor plates, about 1 inch, to the front, which increased the frontal armor thickness to 50mm, or 2 inches, and boosted the machine's combat survivability. This technical solution slowed down the production process, but it improved crew protection during combat operations in the conditions of North Africa. The design of the Semovente M40 represented an engineering solution that combined simplicity with functionality. The vehicle was built on the chassis of the M13 series medium tank, the predecessor to the M1441. The running gear remained unchanged. Each side utilized semi-elliptical leaf springs, front drive sprockets connected to the transmission, 2 suspension bogies with 4 pairs of rubberized road wheels, and rear idlers with a track tensioning mechanism. The system also included 3 rubber return rollers. Despite some questions regarding its reliability, the suspension managed to do its job in desert conditions. The power plant, borrowed from the base tank, consisted of an 8-cylinder, liquid-cooled Fiat S PA 8T diesel engine, putting out 125 horsepower. For a machine weighing over 11 tons, that just wasn't enough power, which limited both speed and maneuverability. On top of that, the engine was prone to mechanical breakdowns, creating extra difficulties during operation. The engine compartment sat in the rear of the hull, protected by a 27mm armor plate, roughly 1 inch thick. 2 maintenance hatches were located on top, while the roof of the engine deck was 10mm thick, or less than half an inch. The upper hull saw significant changes compared to the original tank. The turret was removed and replaced with a fixed, casemate-style armored superstructure, assembled from armor plates bolted to an internal frame. This design simplified assembly at the factory and allowed for damaged parts to be swapped out in the field if necessary. The front of the casemate received reinforced protection, consisting of 2 welded 25mm plates, providing a total thickness of 50mm, or 2 inches, enough to stand up to most anti-tank weapons of that period. The driver's station on the left was equipped with a vision slit, along with a hyposcope offering a 30-degree field of view mounted above it, for use when the armored cover was closed. A round opening with a spherical mount for the weapon was positioned in the center of the frontal plate. The obese Da 75-18 howitzer was modified to fit inside the cramped fighting compartment, shifted to the right of center to give the driver on the left enough room to work. Horizontal traverse was limited to 20 degrees to the left and 16 degrees to the right. This restricted the ability to engage targets outside that sector, often requiring the crew to rotate the entire vehicle to aim at a new object. Vertical guidance allowed the barrel to depress 12 degrees for firing from high ground and elevate up to 22 degrees for indirect fire, although in practice, the self-propelled gun was mainly used for direct fire. The side walls of the casemate, as well as the rear, were 25mm thick, while the roof was protected by 15mm plates designed to stop shrapnel and small arms fire. A hatch was fitted in the roof, allowing the commander to use a periscopic sight to observe the battlefield while staying under armor protection. The sight was equipped with a graduated reticle for precision, aiming at various distances, and could be removed when not needed. The fighting compartment was characterized by limited space, housing a crew of 3. On the left, near the front plate, sat the driver on a folding seat. In front of him were the steering levers and a vision slot with a hyperscope. The engine controls, including the ignition, were placed on the side wall to the driver's left. To the right of the gun breech, on a small round seat, was the vehicle commander, who doubled as the gunner. In front of him were the handwheels for vertical and horizontal aiming, as well as the sighting instruments. In the rear of the fighting compartment worked the loader, who was responsible for feeding shells and operating the RF-1CA radio made by Magnet Ima Rel Lee. Starting from mid-1941, the ammunition load consisted of 44 rounds stored in boxes behind the driver's and commander's seats. The box behind the driver also served as the seat for the loader. This amount of ammunition led to the need for frequent resupply or strict conservation of shells in combat. For self-defense against infantry and air targets, a 6.5mm Breda model 30 machine gun was mounted on the roof of the casemate, operated by the loader through an open hatch. Operating the weapon was complicated by a low rate of fire and a peculiar reloading system that required manipulating the magazine and a 20-round stripper clip before every shot. In the conditions of the African theater, sand and dust stuck to the oil in the chamber, forming an abrasive paste that often caused the machine gun to jam. The loader's multitasking reduced the vehicle's overall combat effectiveness, as one person physically could not load shells, maintain radio contact, and fire the machine gun simultaneously. The commander was also overloaded, combining target acquisition, gun laying, and crew command. Using the machine gun made firing the main gun impossible, as the loader left his post, and the commander and driver were forced to help with machine gun ammunition, distracting them from their primary duties. By the middle of 1941, the chief of the General Staff of the Royal Italian Army, Mario Roata, approved the organizational structure for the new self-propelled units and ordered the formation of 5 Semovente groups for the artillery regiments of tank divisions. According to the command's plan, these vehicles were intended to function as long-range artillery, similar to the American M3 self-propelled howitzers, providing offensive support with indirect fire from concealed positions. Each group consisted of 2 batteries, which included 4 Semovente M40 75-18 self-propelled guns and 2 Carro Comando M40 command tanks per battery, plus a reserve of 2 self-propelled guns and 1 command tank. In total, the unit numbered 8 combat self-propelled guns and 4 command vehicles, as well as support transport, trucks, and motorcycles for staff logistics. After the arrival of the first Semovente groups in North Africa, it became clear that combat conditions in the desert differed from theoretical calculations. Attempts to use the short-barreled howitzer for long-range fire proved ineffective, as the gun demonstrated poor grouping at distances over 1,000 meters, or about 1,100 yards, making precise target engagement difficult. Limited horizontal traverse angles, totaling 36 degrees, did not allow for dense barrage fire without maneuvering the entire vehicle, making the self-propelled gun inconvenient for classic artillery tasks. The supply of 44 shells was quickly exhausted during intense firing, forcing the equipment to withdraw to replenish ammunition and interrupt infantry support. A tactical shift occurred after a Semovente unit found itself in close-quarters combat with British forces, engaging armored targets with direct fire. The short-barreled howitzers proved effective against tanks despite a low muzzle velocity of less than 500 meters per second, or about 1,600 feet per second. This success came down to the ammunition capabilities of the 75mm gun, specifically the F-FET to Prawn 2 shaped charge rounds developed for military use. Standard Granada Perforante armor-piercing shells from 1932 could only penetrate about 40 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters, which wasn't enough against well-protected targets. But the shaped charge rounds worked differently. They didn't rely on speed to punch through obstacles, but instead used the directed explosion of the warhead to create a jet of molten metal. These shells could cut through about 100 millimeters of steel protection, nearly 4 inches, at 1,000 meters, allowing them to take out American M3 Grant medium tanks with their 70mm frontal armor, as well as the M4 Shermans that were beginning to reach Allied troops. British Crusader and Valentine tanks were also vulnerable to this ammunition and could be knocked out by a hit. With this in mind, Command re-evaluated the vehicle's role, recognizing them as superior tank destroyers, and began using the Semovente for direct fire support alongside M13 and M14 medium tanks in the fight against enemy armor. In the summer of 1942, Italian self-propelled guns took part in offensive operations alongside the 132nd Ariete Armored Division, demonstrating high efficiency against superior Allied forces. The vehicle's low silhouette, standing about 1.5 meters tall, or 5 feet, made it a difficult target, especially in the desert landscape where fire was often exchanged over sand ridges. Reinforced frontal armor, 50 millimeters thick, protected the crew from most anti-tank weapons of the time, allowing them to operate even under heavy fire. Italian crews developed a number of tactical tricks to improve the vehicle's survivability in combat. Specifically, they bolted spare track links to the front of the superstructure, which served as extra shielding against armor-piercing shells and could reduce their penetration capability. They also used sandbags piled on top of the armor to create improvised, multi-layered protection that was considered effective against certain types of British artillery shells. Together with the hung tracks, this changed the appearance of the Semovente, giving it a much more massive and menacing look in the eyes of the enemy. One of the most effective techniques was using cover and trenches for concealment on defensive positions. Crews would create depressions or use natural folds in the terrain to hide the hull, leaving only the upper part of the superstructure and the gun exposed above the surface. This position made the self-propelled gun a hard-to-spot target against the background of sand and rock, one the enemy often didn't detect until the first shot was fired. The low profile of the self-propelled gun gave it a decisive advantage in desert conditions, where any elevation provided a significant view and high tank silhouettes became easy targets for artillery. While sitting in cover, the unit could wait for enemy armor to approach within effective range and deliver precise fire, while remaining barely visible. Field reports from North Africa recorded the effectiveness of these machines against Allied armor, and the Italian Army Command concluded that this model was not just an artillery howitzer, but an effective assault weapon. By late spring of 1942, the Semovente M40-7518 was considered the most effective anti-tank asset at the disposal of Italian troops, surpassing the combat performance of their available medium tanks. On May 26, 1942, The assault began on the fortified zone of Bir Hakime, which was being defended by General Koenig's French troops. The positions had been turned into a stronghold, complete with minefields and anti-tank ditches. Operating alongside the attacking forces was a group of Semovente self-propelled guns, tasked with suppressing firing points using direct fire and destroying fortifications. During the intense combat, Italian M13 medium tanks took heavy losses from French artillery and anti-tank guns. Throughout the siege, about 30 medium tanks were lost, picked off by the accurate fire of the defenders. At the same time, the self-propelled guns demonstrated a higher level of survivability. Despite the intensity of the fighting, permanent losses among these machines amounted to only a few units. Thick frontal armor and a low silhouette protected the self-propelled gun crews from most hits, while the powerful 75mm Semovente guns proved their effectiveness as assault weapons. They were capable of withstanding intense fire and effectively suppressing fortified positions, making them a crucial element in offensive operations against prepared defenses. 4 days after the fall of Bir Hakeim, a battle took place near Knightsbridge that demonstrated the capabilities of these machines against superior Allied armored forces. A group of self-propelled guns, together with M13 tanks, likely from the A-Ra-Ete division, took up camouflage positions in the sector northeast of Behaka, and prepared to repel attacks by British troops attempting to relieve encircled units. The British command sent 2 tank regiments into the offensive with a total of 30 M3 Grant medium tanks and 10 M3 Stuart light tanks, counting on breaking through the positions with a massive armored strike. The British crews moved into the attack in tight formation, not expecting significant resistance. The Italian units remained in their positions, waiting for the enemy tanks to close into the optimal range for using their F-2 Pronto shape charge rounds. When the targets were within direct firing range, the self-propelled guns opened fire. The short-barreled Semovente guns began methodically hitting their marks, knocking out the Grant tanks. The British tankers couldn't immediately locate the source of the fire, as the low profiles of the self-propelled guns blended into the terrain, giving themselves away only by their muzzle flashes. Attempts to return fire bounced off the frontal armor of the Italian machines, which withstood hits from the 75mm shells of the guns mounted in the sponsons of the M3 tanks. In just a few minutes, about 20 disabled Allied tanks remained on the battlefield, including 15 M3 Grant medium tanks, which had formed the core of the attacking force. The rest of the British forces retreated, leaving the damaged vehicles and the battlefield to the Italian side. Italian losses were insignificant: 2 M13 medium tanks, while the Semovente unit didn't lose a single machine, demonstrating high survivability and combat effectiveness. This episode became a prime example of the successful use of self-propelled artillery in anti-tank defense, where position selection and crew actions allowed a small number of machines to inflict heavy losses on superior enemy forces. Word of the battle spread among the troops, confirming they had the means to stand up to Allied armor. After the events of the summer campaign of 1942, the Allies concentrated significant resources for a strike on Axis positions near El Alamein. On October 23rd, the Second Battle of El Alamein began, where British troops deployed a massive amount of tanks, artillery, and aviation that significantly outnumbered the defensive forces. Semovente self-propelled guns from the A-Ra-Ete division saw combat providing cover for the retreat of Italian and German formations during Montgomery's offensive. In the course of these maneuvers, the destruction of several M3 Grant and M4 Sherman tanks was confirmed. On November 4th, a general withdrawal of Axis forces to the west began, and Italian units fought rearguard actions, holding back the enemy's advance and giving the infantry time to break away from the British tank columns. The division received orders to delay the advancing forces at a designated defensive line. Semovente crews took up positions alongside available M13 and M14 tanks. During successive Allied attacks, they fired on Sherman and Grant tanks until they ran completely out of ammunition, or their vehicles were knocked out by direct hits. The heavy casualties suffered by the crews on the battle lines allowed the main forces to escape total encirclement and withdraw to new defensive positions in Libya. The main problem for this type of self-propelled gun remained the critically low number of vehicles produced, which wasn't enough to equip all the armored divisions. In total, the manufacturer produced 60 units on the M1340 chassis. Each division received only a group of 8 combat vehicles, which couldn't provide enough firepower to influence the outcome of major battles. During the fighting near El Alamein, the small number of self-propelled guns couldn't withstand the enemy's superior numbers, and the defensive line was breached under massive pressure. Production based on the obsolete M1340 chassis ceased in early 1942, as industry shifted to the improved M1441 chassis. In December 1941, an order was placed for 166 units on this new base. The effectiveness of the self-propelled concept drove designers to develop more powerful variants, capable of defeating the reinforced armor of the newest tanks, which were becoming more dangerous with every month of the war. Engineers created a modification armed with a long-barreled gun, boasting a muzzle velocity significantly higher than that of the short-barreled howitzer, ensuring better armor penetration at long ranges. The next step was a model with an even more powerful gun, originally developed as an anti-aircraft weapon, but adapted for anti-tank duties. This machine featured design elements from a different engineering school and could penetrate much thicker armor, while maintaining a low silhouette and casemate layout. The evolution of the line resulted in a heavy assault gun, built in 1943, on a specially modified M1542 chassis, which was widened and lowered to mount a massive 105mm howitzer. This 25 caliber weapon was intended for infantry support and destroying fortifications, but shaped charge rounds allowed it to penetrate up to 120mm of armor, almost 5 inches, making the vehicle dangerous even to heavy tanks. The crew consisted of 3 men, which overburdened the commander with duties, yet the concept remained unchanged: a low-profile, protected vehicle with a powerful gun for direct fire support. All later variants followed the basic doctrine: a squat, turretless assault gun with reinforced armor and an emphasis on firepower over mobility. After September 1943, the surviving self-propelled guns ended up on opposite sides of the front. Some fell to German troops who continued to use them on the Italian peninsula, while others remained with units fighting on the side of the Allies. German detachments utilized these machines for their reliability and effectiveness, incorporating them into anti-tank formations where the equipment continued destroying enemy armor until the end of the war. By May 1945, most of the vehicles had been lost in combat or abandoned due to breakdowns and a lack of spare parts, and the few surviving examples were sent for scrapping after the fighting ended.